Hey everyone, today we're going to cover retopology, topology, and edgeflow in any 3D software. I'll be using Maya and Quadra for this demo, but the concepts and workflows discussed here can be applied to any 3D software. I'll be showing you the do's and don'ts and how to apply these workflows into practice from my latest videos on topology. If you found these videos helpful or have any of your own tips or want me to continue to cover topology in greater detail, let me know down in the comments below. As always, a like and subscribe is always appreciated as I continue to grow the content of this channel. So with that, let's get started. Alright, so here we are in Maya, and you can see that I have this awesome looking dragon sculpt here that I've started to do the retopologizing on using the modeling toolkit and Quadra. So I'm going to show you guys everything about Quadra here in just a moment, but I did want to say a big thank you for Richard Bryce Gore, who gave me the sculpt model. You can check out his work on ArtStation, and I pulled it from one of his daily sculpts that he did here right off of ArtStation. So we were talking about topology, and I really wanted to kind of demo this on this cool looking model. He also does some YouTube videos and tutorials, so make sure to check that out. So now that we're back in Maya, you can see what I have here, okay? So the first thing I want to cover is just the tool Quadra and everything you need to know about it. So the key thing here right now is if you already know how to do Quadra, go ahead and skip to the table of contents down below or to the next section, and then we can start talking about topology. But first, let's go ahead and take a look at how to use Quadra. So I will go ahead and grab this dragon model. I'll hit Control-1 to isolate, and I'll go ahead and do what's called set live surface or make selected object live. Okay, so with this dragon selected, I'll go ahead and hit this magnet up top here, and you can see that it went ahead and set this live surface. Now, just to be sure, how do we know? If we go ahead and hit this edged or wireframe on shaded here, you can see that it's green, and that signifies that this is now a live surface, so you can no longer select it. All right. So if I go ahead and enable Quadra, you can see now I can start, I get a kind of a different looking cursor. I'll go ahead and turn off the wireframe on shaded mode and begin plotting some points down. Now again, you can get to that from the modeling toolkit and enabling Quadra here. Now, the way Quadra works, it's kind of in the name, it's you draw quads, all right? So we're going to plot 4 points. So as you can imagine, each one of these points here that I'm left clicking is a vertice that equals up to a quad or a polygon, all right? So if I actually go ahead and turn off symmetry, because I don't want to confuse anybody right now, and we can do a clear dots down here on these settings. So I'll go ahead and just do 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, just by left clicking, and then you kind of hover on the inside here and hold shift, and then left click once you're inside, and it lets you know that once you're inside and you're holding shift, it'll let you know this icon here or this highlighting effect that you can click and create a quad there. Okay, now once you've created the initial quad, you can continue to plot points down and continue to create more polygons and quads here. Now, obviously, there's way more tools than just left-clicking some vertices and points and creating a quad, but so let's look into that. All right. Now, what I highly recommend is taking a look at some of these settings here. Now, if I go ahead, you can see there's auto weld here. If I drag one of these points here closer to the other points, it'll automatically snap and weld. Okay. So you can change that setting by here. And then you have kind of some other options, which we'll look to in a little bit here. Now, if you accidentally create like a bunch of points and you want to delete them, you can hold Control Shift and left click, or if you want to clear everything, you can simply hit clear dots. Now, all the way at the bottom here, you can see keyboard, mouse, and shortcuts, so we'll quickly run through the majority of these here. So we have left mouse button, which is just simply creating the points here, and then by holding shift on the inside, that's going to create a new face. Now, middle mouse button is going to move and manipulate your edges, your faces, and your points here. Okay, just by simply holding middle mouse button. So it's just a way to tweak and modify things. Now, if you, let's say, hold Control and left click, all right, now you've gone ahead and added an edge that runs down here. So what you could do is use Control Shift and start left clicking if you wanted to remove some edges, or hold Control to left click and add edges. So Control Shift to delete and Control to add. So that's Control Shift left click and control left click. All right, so you have those there. Now, another cool thing that you can do is use tab. Now, tab just allows you to just grab the edges and allows you to just copy edges along the surface. Now, you could also hold tab and middle mouse button to do an entire edge loop. So just like you can kind of hold control shift and, you know, remove entire edge loops, you can hold tab and middle mouse to copy entire edge loops, or tab and just left click to copy edges. Okay, now again, as you start to build up some surfaces and you don't want faces, you can hold control shift and just start deleting them. Now you can click and drag hold as you're going and delete entire edge loops or face loops that way. And you can, let's say if things are a little bit messy and unorganized like this, you can hold shift and do a relax. So shift left mouse button does this nice relax, and look how it just kind of evenly distributes all of your edges. All right, so I would say that is the majority of the tools here that you're going to be using as you're continuing to build up. And I guess one thing is you can always just hold tab and just click, and that'll just kind of plot a face here. So if you're going through and adding some tools, you can do that. I guess the last thing here is the quad draw tools or options. So if you hold control shift, right mouse button, you can grab these tools here. So as you saw, like I can hold control shift, right click, clear dots, boom. Now, the one nice thing to keep in mind is you can hold control shift, right click, grab multi-cut, or just simply grab it from the multi-cut here, or of course hold shift as you're kind of in quad draw mode, shift right click and grab multi-cut. Now what's nice about this as you're grabbing multi-cut is it will snap to the live surface. So you can see that I'm going in and adding. So if actually I delete maybe this one and then I am cutting in some edges, you simply can do that and it'll add all of these edges and snap them to the surface, which is really cool. And you don't have to worry about going back and snapping something. So the multi-cut tool works right within there. So boom, you can see how that just adds in all of that topology there and it snaps it along the surface. All right, so that in a nutshell, or I would say is a pretty high level, quick rundown on how to use all of the quad draw tools, or the majority of the quad draw tools. Now, let's get into the important part, which is edge flow and topology. All right, so now that we've gone through and understand how to use quad draw, let's take a look and now really understand retopology and topology and edge flow. All right, so the number one thing that I can tell you for topology and retopo is if I go ahead and show you this group here, and it's this start group here, and if I go ahead and hit quad draw, take a look at this. The number one tip when starting out and retopologizing your models is to start with your edge loops and face loops first. All right, you can see here that I've done that. This is exactly what I've started with, everything that you see here in the blue. And you see that I'm focusing on the eye loop, I'm focusing on the mouth loop, and you can kind of see I have the horn and nose area here, and you know I've gone and worked up the ears as well, and I'm just kind of starting, and you can see all these details here as well. You can see right around here I have kind of that skull deformation in there, so I know I'm going to need some topology to focus on that, and then where the horns are coming out, right? Now, this is a fairly complex model, but what I'm trying to show you is how you can take these simple key concepts, principles, and workflows and apply them to complex objects, all right? So now, the next thing you want to keep in mind is you want to start with edge flow and topology first, all right? And you want to make sure to kind of keep a good spacing of your face loops. So if I go ahead now and grab my dragon here, kind of isolate that, and I'll go ahead and enable quad draw. You want to go ahead and, like I said, kind of just start with a good distribution of edges. Now, you don't want to go too small. So if our do right now is to start with edge flow and face loops, the don't here is don't make them too small or too big, right? Use kind of your best judgment. Now, what do I mean by that is if I go ahead and plot this face down here, and you kind of start with this, you can see that it's like, okay, so I'm going to kind of start with this face, and I'm going to just start extruding out, right? And we're starting to extrude out, and we're starting to cover a lot of surface area here, but you're going to eventually reach a point where you're like, okay, well, I need to add more detail there, and I need to add more detail there for the nose, and then the eye. How do I go about that, right? So I see this a lot when students are starting out. They just kind of want to cover the most ground as possible, right? And then when you do this, this is setting you up for a lot of challenges to have to cut in manually, which is the complete opposite of using a tool like Quadra, right? You kind of want to just use multi-cut towards the end as you're finalizing and rerouting edges, right? And now on the opposite end is if you got something like this, then for something that's even like kind of detailed here, you're starting with really, really small faces, okay? So think about it as, you know, time is money, clicks is money, and just the amount of effort that you're spending here working on, you know, retopoing your models. If I'm going in here and just adding, every one of these edges that I'm adding is essentially more clicks, right? And not even from a timing standpoint, but from a complexity standpoint. So if I add too many, now it's just way more to deal with, and I'm just kind of creating a lot more problems or a lot more to worry about down the road, right? So you can see how I'm adding this, and sometimes you don't even notice you're doing it. You're so zoomed in, you're like, okay, let's keep going, and you're just adding geometry, and then you zoom out and you're like, oh crap, like I've added way too much detail here. I don't have enough detail here. So you want to keep a good high level view here, right? So if I'm kind of going, I mean, I kind of just keep a good nice even distribution, you know, and the good thing is you can always add more as you need it. So just find a good happy medium between large polygons and small polygons, and depending on the surface of your details, that's definitely going to be something that you want to keep in mind from the get-go. All right, now that we understand we're focusing on edge flow, we're focusing on face loops, we're keeping in mind a good size and distribution of edge flow. Now we want to make sure to understand how to do what's called localizing topology, which is something that I covered in my last video, right? So I'm going to pull up my pure ref here, and you'll see this image here, or this kind of legend that I use, where you're starting with one polygon. You can take that and convert it into two by splitting or adding this looping edge here, or you can take that and continue it even further and add four. So by using this method here, where you're kind of adding these faces here, which will allow you to add two more faces, and then you can take that and split it and add what's called a diamond or a kite quad, okay? So if I go over here, so I'll go ahead and just simply delete this. And what I want to do is show you what I have here, which is this, okay? Now, if I go ahead and Control-1, isolate, you'll kind of see what I've got here. So based off of this legend here, you can see what I have going on, okay? So the key thing here actually is the green faces are my edge loops. These are the edge loops and the face loops that I started with initially, okay? So I started with these, and then you can see that I've gone now and added a lot more detail, okay? And I'm using things like these kite quads here. So I've kind of highlighted them as you can see. And I'm using, you know, kites. I'm adding these kind of this 2 to 4. So we're starting with two faces here. And then we're adding in these faces that allows us to have 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? And then that, you can see I can localize this topology, and this allowing me not to have and not to carry that topology through all the way through the rest of the skull. And you can see that exactly happening here, where I have this kite quad here, and I just need another edge or two for the brow area instead of having to take and adding in these edges all the way throughout the skull. Right? So because you want to avoid adding in needless edges, right? So you can see that I have my Quadra face here, and if I wanted to add some edges to add some more detail, I don't want to just, so you can see kind of this brow area may need a little bit more detail. Well, I don't want to just simply, just start adding in edges like so, because that's just going to add edges throughout the rest of the model. And look how just that messes everything up, right? So adding in these 3 edges here really, really dirtied things up. So I can go in here and I can delete these edges, or by holding Control Shift and clicking those, that's going to help. Right? And then now what I can do, actually, what I always recommend is to use symmetry with World X here. And you can see I need a little bit more geometry. So I'm going to kind of quickly show you how to do this live. So if I start with this one here, you can kind of see where I'm going to try to work. So I want to work in this area here to add some more detail on the brow. So I'll go ahead and kind of delete these faces here. And then now I'm going to go ahead and add in these faces like so. So watch how I'm kind of going ahead and starting to add that. And the technique that I'm using is this one right here, how to go from 2 to 4. So I'm going and adding in this piece here. So now that I've got that, I can go ahead and start adding in this geometry, and we can start to get more of that detail here and more of that geometry. And then now you can see I can go ahead, if I wanted to, add that throughout the rest of the model. So I could go ahead and add it there, right? And you get something like this. And I'm just left clicking to add those faces here. And then I can go ahead and remove this one and just go ahead and bridge that across. All right. So now we get this, which is going to help us hold this brow area a lot better. And I can hold left click and drag to do this relaxing that we talked about. So now that's going to help kind of space this out a little bit and give us a nice distribution along the mesh. And so we're just adding in some more form there. All right. So you can see with symmetry plus relaxing, we're getting some nice, good detail there. Right. So this is just one example of how you can add some more geometry and route your edges here. So you can see I need to clean up just a little bit here. Sometimes it acts a little bit weird, but there we go. And there you are. So you can see how I've done that. Now, even though this dragon is a organic model, these techniques can be applied to hard surface examples as well. Okay, so now if we take a look at this ear, I think this ear is a perfect example of this technique in this workflow, right? So if I go ahead and isolate this ear, you'll see, something very organic here. So I'm showing you the green edge loops. So the face loops here. So these green face loops are the edge loops that I started with. And you can see that you're going from a lot of detail here. We need a lot of edge flow and topology and polygons, but it ends up here in this very fine point. So you can see if we go back to the polygon techniques, here we're going from 2 to 4 to 6 and then back down, right? So you can see I'm starting here with the 2, and then I'm adding in this technique here where I'm getting the 4, and then I'm doing that again, right? So I have the 4, and then now I'm getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? And then it's even more, right? So I can go ahead and do that as I'm going for the ear canal here. So we're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? And then this technique here is this routing the edge that I'm using right here. There's 2 polygons right about here, okay? And then you can see the kite that I'm using here, which is this yellow technique here, right about here. All right. So you can see how I'm using that all throughout the mesh, right? And I'm using that especially for something as complex and organic, but everything is still manageable, right? And is organized. I can select these and you can still see I have a nice clean face loop here. I select this, I have a nice clean face loop there. I've gone ahead and added in kind of this routed this edge flow here, these face loops, only in this area. So this right here is a perfect example of localizing your topology and only adding topology where you need it, okay? Because I don't need to just continue to route and start adding in things where I don't need them, All right, because the other thing I wanted to show you is that I'm also using triangles, right? Now, in triangles in areas that aren't deforming and for retopologized or low poly models is 100% fine. You can keep triangles and use triangles as needed without having to add more complexity to your models. All right, so you're starting to see that being applied all throughout the mesh here, and you can start to see, you know, hopefully it's starting to make sense where that's happening in practice, okay? All right, so the next step that I have is how do you go ahead, once you add the face loops, is go ahead and just make sure to add good, clean, even distribution of edges throughout the rest of the model. So if I go ahead with this is the earlier part of the process, so I'm going to go ahead and just quad draw on this part of the model. What I don't recommend doing is this, where you kind of just starting here and then building up, and it's just a lot more clicks, right? And then you can see, like, if I add maybe some geometry here and going up, and we're just adding a lot more clicks. So what I can do, right, if I hold Control Shift left click to delete all that, is instead I'm just going to go ahead and kind of add in these larger faces that I know I'm going to add detail to. All right, and I'm going to want to make sure to match the end geometry here, edges, to the end geometry here at the target. Same thing going horizontally and vertically here. So I can go ahead and just kind of, you know, add in some of these geometries or these edges, and I can just make sure that I have the edges to copy over. Now I'm using tab and middle mouse to copy these over. So we're going to get something like this here, and we can see I can probably add this one to right about here, and I can use tab again to get somewhere right around here. I won't merge these or weld these yet. Now I want to make sure I'm using a Fong and a blend, or a blend, and I'm using the highlights of the object to make sure that I stick with, you know, conforming to the main curvatures of this object, right? So, or our models here. So we can have something like this, and there we go. Maybe just kind of redo that face there, and then I'm going ahead and just adding that across. So you can start to see now, okay, I have a pretty close here. I know I'm going to do like kind of this kite quad effect on this piece here, and I want to make sure just to kind of match and conform to the surface. So I'm looking at this broad highlight here on the dragon, and then I'm going to add in another kind of face here, or manipulate these vertices here. So there we go, something like this. That's looking pretty good. And then now I want to start building off of this eye. So if I go from this eye now, the orbit of the eye, I can start to kind of come out from there. And then I'll start to know pretty close how much geometry I'm going to need to match up between the two. So we get something like this. I'm going to keep this one right about here. Now it looks like I'll probably have to add one that runs about here. Actually, is what I did is added some more detail that ran there, but we'll come back to that one, or I'll show you at least how I handled that. And we can continue with this. We can start to see that I'm going from here, continuing the orbit of the eye. So I'll kind of stop it right there, so we can at least kind of see how now I'll connect these parts here. So I know now I'm going to have to match 1, 2, 3 of these edges along to about this part of the dragon's nose. So I'm going to come down to here, and we're going to see how, you know, we're going to merge these two pieces here. So if it gets a little bit tricky, I'll just go ahead and tab left click, and that should work. And this is why I didn't go crazy and add too many pieces of geometry, but I'll show you kind of how, you know, we'll see how I handle this area here, right? And I'll go ahead and continue that, continue this here, kind of left clicking on the inside, and we get something like this right now. So I'll keep this one, I'll just tab this one out. All right, and I'll probably go from here. All right, so we get something like this now. Well, that's where I can start to add in this point. You can kind of see how I can take all of these ones, and using that kind of that 6:4 to 2 method, I can do that here. Control Shift, remove that piece. And then we get something like this, and I can weld this edge. So good. So I'm starting to get some pretty good geometry here. I would say I have one more that I can add there. And maybe I can bring this down probably a little bit, much closer, lower here, right? So I'm going to keep this a bit tighter for now. All right, so we have that, and we'll keep this kind of following this main highlight here, and we can focus on that. And we have this so far. So I'll go ahead now, so you can see what I have here. I can go ahead and start to weld these together. So I've welded those together, and then you can see now I'm going to go ahead and add one more here in the middle, which I know I'm going to need. And this is going to be part of this kite quad here. So I can go ahead now and kind of add this like so. And I can move this a little bit over, and we can kind of see how we deal with that. So it's just kind of adding and removing as we go. And, I'll go ahead and tab left click to bring that out, and go ahead and snap these verts. Right, so you can start to see again how I'm just, adding this at a high level here. And we get something like this. And then now if I need to, we can go ahead and add a little bit more geometry to this part of the dragon, or the nose of the dragon. So I can go ahead now and add that in there. So I'm only adding in as I needed to conform to the geometry, right? So I can go ahead and kind of follow these and start snapping these together. And there we go. And I'll just kind of move this, finish that off there. And you can start to see, I'll move this over and just boom. Add in that. So you can kind of see how I'm going through and doing this part. And then we know we're going to need probably another edge that runs along here. And then now we can start to connect the eye portion over here. And we can kind of come up to this part of the brow. And we can start to add in that geometry there. Right, so I'll probably take it to maybe just about here, where I can bridge this. Maybe I'll just add in one more edge that runs like so. So I'll do it like this. And we can tab that to connect this. And we'll just shift click that. You can kind of see, again, just how we're just manipulating and adding and just making sure that we're keeping the same amount of face loops and edges to add and to connect from one end to the other. Kind of messed that one up. There we go. So I think I can, you get the idea. I didn't want to go too long here, but because I'll show you kind of a narrated version as well. And so you can kind of see now I can continue this and working my way. So this is just a quick high level of how I'd start with the eye loop and the face loop, work my way across, and you can see now it's a little bit uneven. No worries. That's where I can start to hold shift and start relaxing this and getting that nicer detail and distribution of edges along our mesh. And look at that, it's starting to really clean that up. And then now I can space things out even and add in more geometry without, just kind of focusing on the overall form. And if I need a little bit more, you move things up, you space them out and move that. Now you can of course entirely manipulate entire edge loops with middle mouse, middle control, shift, middle mouse. There we go. And you can just now start to shift, left click, and just kind of relax that out. All right. So next I will cover how I handle the ear and narrated, and just do a quick narration of that. Working right now. So this is a time lapse. This is sped up just so I can kind of narrate what I'm doing here. So you can see that I already have the ear loop, the key face loop that runs all the way around the ear, and I'm just kind of building off of that. All right. And once I build off of that, I can then start to continue to add geometry where I need it. So I'm going ahead and kind of adding in the thickness that's around the dragon's ear. And then I'm adding in geometry as I need it. And I'm focusing on good, clean face loops and a good even distribution of edges. Now I'm going to the inner part, so you can see how I'm going from a very narrow tip of the ear and how I'm going into a much wider, deeper, more detailed part of the ear canal. And I'm using that same technique, you guys. I'm using that same technique where I go from 6 to 4, 4 to 6, 2 to 3. And then now I'm building just like the back of the ear. I started building the back of the ear at this point so I can keep the geometry matching all throughout. And you can see I've started to add the 2 to 4 geometry method, the face method. And then now I'm going through and adding in, you know, that technique all throughout the mesh. I'm localizing my topology, only adding topology where I need it. And you can see I'm using the technique that we just talked about, where I'm using large faces and then just connecting from one end to the other, which helps saves quite a bit of time. And then I'm back here at the ear canal now that I got the rest of the geometry blocked out, and I'm going through and just using a combination of kites, quads, going from 4 to 6, adding a triangle in a rigid area, and then just kind of finishing everything out. I have nice clean face loops, nice clean edge loops, and just controlling the overall topology. So I'm just taking these techniques that we're talking about and applying it through this complex object. All right, and so the last thing I wanted to cover is just to make sure to understand and to look at some good reference and to study topology, right? So here's like this shoe model that you can see that I'm using those types of techniques all over the place. You'll see that I'm using, you know, that double kite here all throughout the mesh just to add some geometry. I'm using the 4 to 2 or 2 to 4, 4 to 6 type edge flow, study good character topology as well, hard surface and organic stuff. You'll see that everywhere. These techniques aren't specific to hard surface, aren't specific to organic characters, and here's some nice hard surface examples here that I'll jump to ArtStation in just a moment, where you can see, if you find a good surface modeler, hard surface modeler, you're going to find these techniques just all over the place. Now remember, triangles are 100% fine, especially on flat surfaces, but you'll see, going from localizing areas of topology where you're going from wide, a lot of topology, to narrow, you're going to be using these techniques that I've talked about today. Exactly here, you can see these types of examples with topology here, going from the 1 to the 2 to 3 faces here. It's just the way to do it. All right. So some good examples there. And, you can see here the guys that I'm referencing from ArtStation. Here's Ben Ert. I think Aramis did a good breakdown, Aramis 3D, where he talked about just his workflow and work style. So make sure to check that out. But, take a look at what a lot of the professionals are doing, industry professionals, So I'm trying to do my best to share my information, but you'll see just so much more information and examples out there. Here's Andrew Hodgson, where he shows how he, starts with the concept, just, nasty triangulated stuff just to get the form. And then he shows how he goes from that, the concept, to production, and then finally the subd model, which is just a subdivided version of this. And that technique he's using is all throughout every single one of his models, which is just how you do things. All right. So I hope this was helpful again. It was just kind of another deep dive. And I almost forgot about this one, this cool looking aircraft model by Michael Calliz here. And he works at CD Projekt Red. This was just, I saw this, it was fantastic stuff. And you'll just see this stuff all over the place with kite quads, diamond quads, and coming back to this, it's just this being applied over and over and over again. All right. So I did my best to show you guys that in practice on this, what I would say is a fairly complex model, organic model, but it can be broken down into simple topology rules, and you can start to create just a good even distribution, a good workflow. All right. So to summarize, always start with edge loops and face loops. Don't make your faces and edges too small, right? Do localize topology. So making sure that you kind of keep topologies in areas that you need it, and don't unneedlessly add geometry where you don't need it. Don't just start adding. That's not going to add a lot to the form, and you can just see it just starts to ruin things that you don't need. Okay, so those are just some high-level rules and tips, do's and don'ts when doing retopology. So I'll wrap it up there. If you guys have any feedback, tips of your own, questions, comments, let me know down below. I'm hoping to now cover, jump back to the cyberpunk grenade, where I'm going to be covering the high to low workflow. So I have the high poly sub-D model, and then I'm going to work on showing how to create the low poly version using retopologizing and texturing through Substance Painter and rendering. So with that, I'll end it there, and I'll see you guys around. So take care and be safe.